Dude, never did it.
Thief of Bagdad and Sherlock. I fucking love Sherlock Jr. I'm excited to talk about that one. And this is one neither of us had seen either movie. Is that right?
Correct.
That's right. Yep. Okay.
All right. Well, you've heard it. We're doing Thief of Bagdad and Sherlock Jr. Jake, thank you for that intro. This is Never Did It. I'm Brad Garoon. Hello. He's Jake Ziegler.
Hi.
The year is 1924. This is the second from oldest episode we're going to do. We're going all the way back to 1923, but we are hitting 1924 because we just thought these movies looked real interesting. Sherlock Jr., let's start with that. I don't even remember who assigned what to whom, and it doesn't really matter because neither of us saw either of these movies before this, and this is going to be a theme for a lot of the pre-1940 years. Not all of them, but quite a few of them.
You picked this one. I remember picking Thief of Baghdad, so yeah, you picked Sherlock.
Okay, so I picked Sherlock. And the reason I picked Sherlock Jr. is I really wanted to do a Buster Keaton movie because I had just seen John Wick 4, and there is a scene in John Wick 4 where Keanu Reeves has to run up a set of stairs, a ton of stairs, to get to where the final fight of the movie is going to be, and he keeps getting knocked back down over and over again to the point where it's funny, then it's scary, then it's funny, then it's treacherous, and Chad Stahelski, who directed that movie, cites Buster Keaton as a huge influence on him. Buster Keaton was a famously very, very physical actor. And when we get into talking about Sherlock Jr. more, we'll talk about some of the stunts in this movie, which are insane, not just for the time, but if they were to come out now, would be just so remarkably dangerous and just would never be done the way that they are. So that's why I suggested it. And I'd never seen a Buster Keaton movie before, and this is his most popular. That
or the General is usually cited as most popular. Yeah, certainly. The General, or Sherlock Jr. or Steamboat. What's the Steamboat Bill? I think would all be right up there.
Okay, so never mind. Sherlock Jr. is the story of a guy who runs projections at a movie theater and also dreams of being the world's greatest detective. He reads about how to be a great detective, and he's also trying to woo a girl in his town and get her to marry him. But so is this other guy. The really funny thing about this movie is the characters don't really have much in the way of characterization, except that Sherlock Jr. wants to be a great detective and the other guy's a jerk. And everyone else just sort of bounces off of them. Or the projectionist, I think is his character's name. Mm-hmm. He proposes to this girl. She says yes. But then the other guy frames him for robbery of the woman's father. And it works. And he has to spend the rest of the movie doing his detective thing and figuring out how to pin the crime on the guy who actually committed the crime. While at the same time, he has these fanciful dreams about being a great detective and all kinds of other stuff. There's a lot of dream logic in the movie that's very cool. And the transitions into those scenes are very cool. What did you think of the movie, Jake?
I loved this movie. And I had seen a couple of Buster Keaton movies. I'm not a scholar or anything, but I did, a couple in college that I had seen in, one of my film classes. And that's so I do love Buster Keaton. But this was one I hadn't seen, obviously. So I was really excited. And this is a 45-minute movie from 1924, and I was watching it one night, and my wife had to tell me to not laugh so loud because it was, keeping her awake, because I was just laughing out loud at some of these just ridiculous sight gags, like the one where, he finds the money and where he's sweeping up outside the theater, and he finds that dollar bill, and he's like, oh, he's all excited, and the lady comes back like, oh, I lost my dollar, and then he has to give it back to her or whatever, and he's going to get that big pile of money. Like, it's just all these cute little sight gags that he does that all just are really funny and really well laid out, and it's just funny still. Like, it looks funny, and he plays it funny, and his facial expressions are funny. Yeah, I laughed all the way through it. I mean, it's just a really funny, well-made movie.
If you've never seen a Buster Keaton movie, but you need to be convinced, here are some people who have been influenced by his style. So he's pretty deadpan, and he was well known for being deadpan. Mel Brooks, heavily influenced by Buster Keaton. Rowan Atkinson. If you are even the tiniest bit of a Mr. Bean fan, you have to start watching Buster Keaton movies. Johnny Knoxville, very clearly heavily influenced by Buster Keaton. And then, of course, as we mentioned, Chad Stahelski and the John Wick movies, the physicality is influenced by Buster Keaton. And then Woody Allen ripped off the movie screen bit in this movie for The Purple Rose of Cairo. So there's this great scene where it's when he's at his lowest, the projectionist, he walks into the movie and then becomes part of a movie that people are watching. And you can watch closely and see the cuts, but when I first watched it, before I started rewinding it and trying to squint, I was like, how did they do this effect 100 years ago? I couldn't get it. And later in the movie, or earlier in the movie, I think actually, it's a 45-minute movie. It all jumbles together. There's a scene, an action scene on a train, and it's a real moving train. And I couldn't figure out how they did it until I realized they didn't do any tricks. They just did it.
Yeah.
It was just crazy dangerous.
Well, that's the interesting thing about Buster Keaton, because I did some reading. I know Roger Ebert had written about Buster Keaton at length, actually. And there's another influence of Buster Keaton I wanted to mention, because I was reading all this Ebert about him, is that not only did Buster Keaton do his own stunts for all these movies, and he has some very elaborate stunts. Like, I loved the one where he's on the roof of that building. There's the gate, the gate that that the car has to drive past.
Yep.
The gate goes up and he gets on it and it drops him down.
Drops through, yeah.
And it's another one, like, I rewound it like 3 times and like they just did it. Like,
they
there's
just did
no
it.
other way to have done it. Like, he just did it. And he did, not only did he do his own stunts, but he was known for doing other people's stunts also, because he knew he could do them and do them well, and usually do them in one take. Like, his most famous stunt, the one that probably everybody has seen, is one where the guy's standing and the house falls down, but he's standing right, where the window is. So
yeah.
I mean, they really did that, and they didn't practice it, because he goes, no, if you stand in the right place, it'll work. You don't want to waste time.
And if you stand in the wrong place, you'll die. But...
Right. And that's what he did. But one of the other interesting influences is that my wife and I, for whatever reason, got a bug up our butt to watch the Andy Samberg film Hot Rod, which we hadn't seen in a while. And it's about a guy, just a young guy, doing these ridiculous stunts on his motorcycle or whatever. And the very, like, the physical aspect of it, Ebert actually compared Andy Samberg in that movie to Buster Keaton, who would just do these ridiculous stunts, and apparently did a lot of them himself too.
Samberg did.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was another connection that I wasn't expecting. I'm watching Hot Rod. I'm not expecting any notable film critic to make a connection to Buster Keaton, but Roger Ebert did it.
So you're saying we need to revisit Hot Rod?
I think you should. We watched it. My wife and I watched it, and we laughed so much harder than we remembered. I remember thinking it was very okay, and came out of it like, oh no, this is actually really funny.
Okay, so I think we need to keep a list. The Never Did It revival tally at this point.
Oh yeah,
is Coneheads, Hot Rod.
There we go.
That's what these are the movies that we're reclaiming. let's actually keep a list. So right now, Coneheads and Hot Rod. I can already think of one that now the internet is sort of doing this for me already, but I can think of an action movie that we're going to talk about later. We've touched on it before, but Last Action Hero. We're gonna big time reclaim that. We're not covering that on the show, but when we get to 93, we'll talk about it a bit. There isn't a ton to say about it outside of what we've said because it's so short. But I don't know, as to Jake's point, I don't know if we have action comedies or Jackass, like a lot of the things that we really like. I know I like Jackass more than you do, but a lot of these things that we really like, I don't know that we have them without Buster Keaton. The most famous silent movie era guy is Charlie Chaplin. And don't get me wrong, his movies are great, and we're going to cover a couple of them on this show, but it's just so fun. Sherlock Jr. is just so fun. 4 stars for me. Highly recommend.
I went full 5. Like I said, I laughed so hard, and I thought I thought it was just this perfect little, almost like mini movie. It was only 45 minutes, it felt. But yeah, I thought it was perfect, and I laughed really hard. I gave it a 5. I really, really loved it.
Perfect. Okay, you gave me The Thief of Bagdad. What did you know about it before you popped it on our list?
Not a lot. I mean, I was just looking at films from 1924, and I recognized the title because it's actually a movie that's been remade twice. They remade it in the 40s and the 60s.
And they fixed the spelling after this one spells Baghdad Bagdad. For the remakes, they spelled it correctly.
Yeah, missing the H. So I wonder why they stopped remaking it, because that kind of seems like something that they would continue to do. I mean, it's the 20s, the 40s, the 60s. I mean, at this point, we're missing 3 versions of Thief of Baghdad. That probably should have been remade at some point, but it was just a recognizable title, and it has Douglas Fairbanks, who's one of the again one of the very early Hollywood stars, a very different type of star than like a Buster Keaton or a Charlie Chaplin, who's definitely more of a straight up action type, whereas the Buster Keaton's more of an action comedy kind of type. Douglas Fairbanks at this point in his career was doing more of the swashbuckling type of action, very Basil Rathbone, Errol Flynn type of stuff. So just figured, I don't know if we'd have another chance to cover a Douglas Fairbanks movie. So it seemed like the title and, that it was remade and that it was Douglas Fairbanks. It seemed like a good one to check out. And it was available readily, pretty easily available too.
Well, that's the cool thing about a lot of these movies is they're all on YouTube. They're so old that most of them are just like public domain. Studios aren't reissuing them, so people post them on YouTube, and then because they're not really interfering with anyone's profit, no one's asking them to be taken down.
Well, and Paramount Plus actually has a huge collection. Like that's where I watched Thief of Bagdad. Like they have a ton of movies from like the teens and the 20s, and I was actually really surprised and impressed. I mean, they've got like some D.W. Griffith early stuff, like Broken Blossoms, and some of this interesting stuff. Like I never thought I'd see that stuff on one of the major streamers, but between YouTube and then some of the streamers have them pretty well covered too.
Yeah, well, that's the other issue, because they can be anywhere, they are anywhere. So I actually, interesting enough, I started watching this on Amazon Prime. I only got 45 minutes into it when I got distracted by something else, and I didn't come back to it for a week. By the time I came back to it, it was off of Amazon Prime. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The version on Prime was not remastered. It was kind of hard to make out what was happening. It was all in black and white. That sounds a little strange. A lot of these movies have color tinting. You think, it's a movie from the 20s. It's going to be in black and white. Some of them had filters over them to express different things, usually the same filter for the entire movie. But this was in black and white and quite faded and had Middle Eastern inspired music. So then I started watching it on Canopy, which is the greatest thing in the world. It was remastered. It was much easier to see what was going on. And the music was I think, closer to what the original score of the movie was, which is just sort of like bombastic classical music. Yep. Which is what Douglas Fairbanks wanted the movie to have. Mm. And they did an interesting thing where someone had tooled around with it. For inside scenes, it was tinted yellow or pink for if it was like a darker place. For outdoor scenes during the day, it was tinted yellow, and at night it was tinted blue. And for indoor scenes, it was tinted pink, or I guess like purple, dark red. And the underwater scenes were green. And it was just interesting that someone had gone to the trouble to do that. Mm-hmm. But they do give two very different vibes. So do you want to real quick run us through what the plot of The Thief of Baghdad is?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a tale of two movies because
absolutely it is.
Yeah, the first half of the movie is kind of Arabian Nights, almost Aladdin type of thing, where it's just Douglas Fairbanks just kind of thieving around Baghdad and getting into mischief and kind of interacting with all the local characters, and it's really impressive looking. Just the way the movie is shot and everything. It's the setup is and again it's impressive, much like Sherlock Jr. I mean, like this is 100 years ago, and they're really put together. A lot of it looks really big and impressive and very cool. Gosh, that's probably like the first hour or so of the movie. And then later on after that, he has to
I can pick up if you need me to.
Yeah, can you pick that up?
So and then in the second half of the movie is a race to see who can be the bride of the princess of Baghdad, the Prince of India or the Indies, but it's the Prince of India. The Prince of Persia and the Prince of the Mongols are all vying for her, but the Thief of Baghdad has sort of conned his way into this circle, and she's made her fall in love with him because of he touched this rose bush that no one else touched, and she's very superstitious. And he actually falls into the rose bush in a pretty funny moment, but he also falls in love with her. And then 45 minutes of the movie decides he doesn't want to be a thief anymore. So he admits his ruse. They threaten to put him to death. He escapes. He reforms. He becomes like a good Muslim. And then he goes on this magical journey to find, I think, what is essentially Pandora's box is what it ends up being.
Yeah, it seems like because the gimmick, right, is to whoever gets the princess is the one who can bring back the most rarest or the most magical night or whatever. And it's like the flying carpet and some of these other things, which I guess
a flying carpet, a crystal ball, and what is the king of the Mongols? Oh, a magical apple that'll bring people back from the dead.
Right, that's it. Which that one sounds a lot better than. I'd probably rather have the apple than like a flying rug.
This is all pretty funny. So all these things, I don't know that any of them are in like Arabic mythology. There's like a Pegasus in this movie. There are sea monsters in this movie. It becomes very much like a Greek mythology kind of movie.
Yeah,
the effects are really cool. The effects in the beginning I thought were interesting, and to your point about it being a tale of two movies. What I was taken by in the first half of the movie, which is a little bit boring, but there are these amazing stunts all done in really wide shots. So you can see not just the stunt, but the effect that it has on like the background actors, which is really cool. And things like the magic rope which is a rope that's attached to nothing that the thief is able to climb. I don't know how they did that. I mean, I don't know how real magicians do stuff like that. I'm sure it's the same, but it was cool to see in this movie. It's funny because I was thinking the king of the Mongols gets, or the prince of Mongols gets the magic apple, and then he hatches this plan, which is to have the princess poisoned so he can use the magic apple to save her and then become the king. But his plan relies on the Prince of Persia's magic rug getting them back to Baghdad, and the Prince of the Indies magic ball seeing that the princess was poisoned so he can, have plausible deniability. So it was like, okay, but then they're able to say that their things were also important to bring her back to life. So his plan didn't make sense. And then it turns out that I was subverted because that wasn't his plan. His plan was actually to just take over the city by force, and he had infiltrated the city with 20,000 of his own troops. But then what he didn't expect was that the Thief of Bagdad would have Pandora's box, which essentially is a Due Machina that can do whatever he wants. And so he creates from the sand an army of tens of thousands of people that take over the city again, and then he wins the princess. It's pretty freaking cool. And the second half of this movie is really exciting.
Yeah, it really picks up a lot. And my wife watches some of these movies with us, but this one, she wasn't super interested in, but she was sitting in the room with me doing whatever on her computer. And then she looked up quite a few times in that second half when it was just like, I'm like, this is, I had to tell, like, this is 100 years ago doing this stuff. I mean, like even just the big army sequence is incredible, but even the flying carpet or like the Pegasus and the sea monsters, like it looks really great, like for obviously time, for the time period. But it's really impressive.
Yeah. I want to talk a bit about the cast. You mentioned all of Douglas Fairbanks' swashbuckling roles. He was a major star during the period. This movie was directed by Raoul Walsh, who played John Wilkes Booth in Birth of a Nation.
Oh, I did not realize that.
Yeah, so that I'm sure was Wall of Fame at the time, kind of Wall of Shame now. That Birth of the Nation, first movie to ever be screened at the White House.
That's right. Yeah, super racist.
Our country has a wild history. An interesting note about Fairbanks and his wife, Mary Pickford. They were the first people to have their hands and feet cemented in the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
He was the first president of the Academy and the first host of the Oscars.
I remember that.
Died of a heart attack 10 years after this movie came out. Was in incredible shape, like just remarkable shape. So cut for a star in 1924. I didn't know that fitness was like such a big deal back then, but this dude looked amazing, although he did smoke. So that may have led to his heart attack.
Everybody smoked then, right?
For sure. Sojin Kamiyama played the Mongol king. He also had a small role in Seven Samurai. And I think that's probably the only connection between Thief of Baghdad and Akira Kurosawa.
Yeah, probably.
He had a pretty extended career back in Japan after his run in Hollywood silent films. And Anna May Wong, who played the Asian like concubine or servant to the princess, she is the woman that Lee Jun Lee's character in Babylon was inspired by. Anna May Wong. It's funny because when I was watching Babylon, I'm like, it's weird that there was this like prominent Asian character, which was very underutilized in Babylon. But yeah, based on a prolific actress during the time. But the thing that got me the most about this movie, and I still don't understand it, and I couldn't find any information about it. There's one scene where there is a real ape in the movie. Yeah. For just a moment, it leads to nothing. And it reminded me of Babylon, of like the excesses of the movie Babylon. Because I was like, they just had an ape because that's just something you do. They put this dangerous creature in this movie just for the hell of it for one shot that had nothing to do with the rest of the movie.
That's right. Just because you could.
Just because you could. I went 3.5 for this one because I was a little bit bored by the first half. What did you think?
I went for similar, first half is okay, but I mean, I was just so impressed by the second half. I went for. Also,
his babyface turn, the Thief of Baghdad's babyface turn was very abrupt. One other thing, and it connects. So I wanted to do something a little bit funny this episode because last episode we talked at length about Zack Snyder's Justice League, but there's a cool experiment that also happened during the pandemic. Another DC film edit. That's apropos last week's episode and this week's episode, and it's called Silent Batman. And it's a cut of Batman 89 by Tim Burton, edited by a fella by the name of Ben Crew, who became kind of famous during the pandemic because he met his girlfriend over Letterboxd, and their story got a little bit of traction. I don't know if they're still together, but their story got my attention and had me following him on Letterboxd, which led me to this cut of Batman 89, which is just exactly what it sounds like, a silent movie version of Batman 89. And it works pretty well. So I asked Jake to watch it too. Jake, what'd you think?
I thought similar to Justice League, I think it's a really interesting experiment. I think the guy who did an amazing job really putting work into it. I mean, the design of the title cards and the color filtering that he did and everything. I think it's and the dialogue that he picked out versus, because I mean, I've seen the original Batman like a million times. I know the dialogue really, really well. And so he doesn't have 100% of the dialogue represented on the title cards, but like the dialogue that he did pick, I thought was key, like the essential dialogue. And I mean, I thought it was impressive, just to see the work that had gone into it. And it's a really cool idea. But by about the halfway mark or so, I'm like, okay, the novelty had kind of worn off a little bit, and then I was just kind of waiting for the rest of the movie to happen. But so it's a one and done kind of watch for me. But again, I think it's really cool thing that he did.
I totally agree. I agree with everything you just said. I've only seen Batman 89 twice before. It's far from my favorite any kind of movie. I actually think it's kind of boring.
I watched a lot as a kid. So
sure. One of the first movie memories I have in theaters is Batman Returns. And I don't think I'd seen Batman 89 yet at that point. Batman Returns definitely made me the sexual animal that I am today. But there were things that I caught watching the silent Batman that I didn't realize when I watched Batman 89. Like, I didn't realize that they were obscuring the fact that Michael Keaton was Bruce Wayne in that movie for a while until I watched this version. Mm-hmm. There were some shots in this, and granted, a lot of this is because movies that are influenced by German Expressionism, like Tim Burton's movies or Terry Gilliam's movies, or even like, in a sense, Wes Anderson's movies, would probably work really well as silent films because they're more akin to the style of how those films looked. But some of the shots works, just like you said, works so well in this, like when Arliss and Kim Basinger turn on the lights in Wayne Manor. That felt like a silent movie shot to me completely. But like you, I was a little bit turned off by, you said, he didn't choose all the dialogue, he chose the right dialogue. I actually felt that there was more dialogue cards than there needed to be to get the story across. And I also felt like maybe 30 to 45 minutes of this movie, of Batman 89, could be cut out. They're superfluous to what's going on in the movie. They make sense when the movie came out, but if you're doing a project like this, yeah, I would say cut more. I'd be interested to see what a less beholden to the original movie would look like.
Like a more streamlined version.
Yeah, totally. And some of the music choices were a little weird. Like, I'm really glad he kept the Prince songs in, despite
I was wondering how he was going to do that. Yeah, and I got excited when I heard Party Man or whatever. Yeah,
very happy he left that in. But some of them, again, I think just to be more true to the 89 version than to the 1920s experiment, didn't quite work for me. But yeah, even though the Prince stuff is totally anachronistic, not to the movie itself, but to the style of what he was doing. Very happy he did that. I'm really happy I found it. I recommend people check it out. So if you want to see this movie, it's on the Internet Archive, and you can find a link to it on Letterboxd by searching Silent Batman and going to the reviews and looking at the Ben Crew, the guy who edited it, looking at his review. He has posted a link to this movie. And you know what? I'll put it in the show notes also, just to make it easy for everyone. Okay, so that's it for 1924 / the COVID pandemic edit of a 1989 movie. But it's got me much more excited to watch more of the silent films than I was before we watched these two. I think I'm confident we have picked good ones.
Agree.
Okay, great. See you next week when we are back for 1959. If you want to know what is coming out next week, go to our Letterboxd profile. You can find me at Brad Garoon on Letterboxd. I think, Jake, you're Jake Ziegler on Letterboxd.
Yep, it's Jake_Ziegler.
And both of us have pinned to our profiles our Never Did It podcast list. You could also just search for the Never Did It podcast list. And the two movies that will be discussed on next week's episode are always at the top of that list. So check that out. And thank you for joining us for Never Did It.